Hi, I'm Mike Seymour, and I'm incredibly enthusiastic to be here with you today with this amazing panel to talk about digital humans and to have a look at the MetaHuman creation tool that's new from Epic Games. But we've assembled a panel from around the world. I'm sitting here in Sydney right now, but I'll get the actual panelists to introduce themselves in a second. But just a quick hello. We've got Amy. Hi, Amy, in the Bay Area.
Hey.
And we have down in LA, Jerome. Hey, Jerome.
Yeah, Mike, good to see you.
As well as Isaac, who's also in LA.
That's correct. Hey, Mike.
And on the other side of the planet, in Europe, actually in Serbia, is Vlad. Hi, Vlad.
Hi, Mike.
Well, as I said, this world-class panel, I'll get them to introduce themselves in a second, but I just want to lay some of the groundwork of why I think digital humans is such an interesting and fascinating area. As one of the co-founders of FX Guide, we spend a lot of time talking to people around the world, and there is no subject that gets more interest, more passion, and more sort of decisive opinion, I guess, than digital humans. And I guess that's because we're all interested in storytelling, and humans obviously sit at the center of nearly all of our stories. So those digital humans can take on many forms. For example, I could be doing a cinematic or cutscene for a game, in which case I'm rendering my characters in real time. But I might have captured them much earlier. I might have done facial capture or motion capture, crafted those performances, and then presented them in real time. I could also actually have you interacting with those characters, either in a game or in some other format, and then I'm both reacting in real time and rendering in real time, which poses another dimension altogether. And then you have to ask the question, what's driving the characters? Are the characters being puppeteered? In other words, are they an avatar? Is there somebody sitting there at the moment that you're interacting with them, sort of controlling that character through a live link or a head-mounted camera or whatever? Or is the character that you're interacting with actually being driven by a computer? We've put a face effectively on a digital agent, and so I'm able to interact with something that is being driven by AI. All of these are interesting different dimensions. As a consequence, we have a sort of an array of technical problems that have to be addressed or challenges to be overcome so that we can provide these characters with enough high fidelity, with enough authenticity that those stories really are proper, interesting, engaging stories that we can lean into. We want the faces of the characters to be able to emote, to be able to provide a link that tells the audience what's going on, sometimes quite different to what's actually being said. So all of this has a requirement for sort of large amounts of compute power, large amounts of algorithmic solutions, large amounts of machine learning to be able to get something that to the user just looks like a person, acts normally. Well, how do we do that? What are some of the issues? And also, what are the sorts of stories that we could tell if we did have digital humans? And how are we going to make them? That's been a big problem, and it's been incredibly expensive to make digital humans, as we'll no doubt hear in a minute. But with things like MetaHuman Creator, we're able to, for the first time, envisage a world where we can have anyone produce a high-quality face that looks good. It's also rigged with an underlying, quite high-end rig that allows the fidelity of performance, not just the fidelity of appearance, to come through. In fact, the importance of the rig is often overlooked, and I'm sure we're going to discuss that, but you need to be able to really have those faces move and emote correctly, not just look good. And then, of course, as I said before, how are we driving them? What's the architecture? What's the method upon which we're actually making these give a performance? Who is the writer if a digital character is spontaneously reacting to me? These and many other questions I'm really looking forward to discussing with our panel. And so now I'll get them to actually properly introduce themselves. And I'm going to start, if I could, with you, Amy. Amy, tell us your background and where you're coming from.
Sure, yeah. So I've been in the game industry for over 30 years now. starting in 1989. And my focus has always been on kind of pushing the bounds of narrative and sort of a cinematic presentation in games. So I started on the Atari all the way, up through the current gen of game hardware. And about a year ago, I joined Skydance Media in a new venture, a new division, a new media division, to essentially explore the new frontiers of interactive storytelling, and thinking about how we can kind of reach a much wider audience and just sort of embrace everybody. And of course, key to that is really relatable, believable, digital, real-time humans.
And so, Jerome, you've got an amazing career, obviously, starting in visual effects.
Yeah, my introduction to visual effects and animation really started with just doing keyframe characters, mostly animals. And then in spanning across 30 years, basically, since I've been at ImageWorks, we've got to really play with the new technology of motion capture back, with Polar Express and Beowulf. And now basically very, very focused in motion capture for digital humans in live action and in animation.
And Isaac, tell us where you're coming from.
Sure. I'm currently the Chief Design and Innovation Officer at Brud. And over the last decade, I've been really focused on digital humans in all kinds of formats, from pre-production to film to games to new technology, which is kind of where I find myself now.
And Vlad, you're in Serbia, but just for those that don't know, what's your background?
Well, I've dedicated my whole career really to capturing appearance and motion of people. So for the last 15 years, I've been dealing with both trying to reach the kind of high fidelity of digital humans, but also at the same time, which is kind of the opposite, trying to run them in huge simulated worlds where performance is key, not fidelity, but hardware performance. So these two kind of sort of opposing problems is what I've been trying to solve for the last 15 or a little bit more years.
And of course, 3Lateral is now part of Epic Games, which is great. And so we're going to hit you up some information on MetaHuman. But actually, I'm going to start with Amy, if I could. Amy, I wanted to ask you a question. You and I were chatting a while ago, and you said for you, the North Star when you're doing these work with digital humans is to honor the choices that actors make. And I thought that was a really interesting comment, that a lot of the stuff we're talking about isn't replacing actors, but that idea of like whether we can get a faithful portrayal, I guess. Could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, look, even back to, when I was working on, early games, there wasn't much we could do. We had a few pixels or a few polygons, and, we did most of what we could with voice. But even then, everything starts from the performance and inspiring your actors and performers. And so even back then, when we only had voice to rely on, I would bring the actors in to work together. I would make them creative collaborators and allow them to improvise so that it felt real and immediate. And then as we moved into motion capture and performance capture, even before facial capture was an option, we put video cameras on the actors so that we could look at the subtle things they were doing with their faces and the very subtle choices they might make in a close-up. And then we would hand key that, to just, we would manually honor their performance. So the beauty of where we're at today with, facial performance capture is the actors can just act and they know that it's getting captured. The little choices they might make about the set of their jaw, or sort of swallowing before they answer a question, or cutting their eyes away. And all these things tell you so much. And we didn't used to have that kind of nuance to rely on, but this is sort of exciting about where we are now, is that, that boundary between live action performance and real-time digital performance is just evaporated.
I mean, Jerome, you must have seen astonishing advances in digital humans. It's really the kind of the final frontier, isn't it, of the hardest thing to do?
I remember probably 20 years ago being discussed, talking about, digital humans and their role in films. And I remember thinking, why would anybody want to try and do a digital human? And which was my own curse. And basically, time and time again, I found myself, working with digital humans, and it's the circle always comes back to a good story. And sometimes you get placed in situations where there's no other way to do the story except to make a digital human. And now it is amazing. It's ubiquitous how easy it is to make a human, it seems. And the easier it is, the more pressure it will be to basically place those creations in stories that basically don't distract you from the fact that you're seeing something synthetic.
And I guess, Isaac, that begs the question, why the heck did you want to do digital humans if they're so hard?
You know, that's a great question. I imagine it's similar to everybody on this panel, and it was because it was the hardest thing to do. You know, when you get into VFX, the thing that at the time it was if, you know, the first question was if we could do digital humans, which was very much in doubt, you know, 10 years ago. I think that's been clearly answered, and now it's how can we best do that, and why, which is a really big question. Like, what are we doing it for, and what purpose is it serving? But yeah, the first reason is I loved art. I loved creating things, and the hardest thing I could find to do was digital humans. So that's what brought me down this road.
So Vlad, I guess that begs the question, why are humans so darn hard to do? Like, why is it that I can do a really believable car and people can't even pick it, but people are constantly saying, you know, that's not right, or I'm sensing something different. Like, what is it about human faces that makes them just such a challenge?
I mean, you know, thinking about it, it's not really surprising that they're hard to do. Like, humans are complicated creatures, much more complicated machine than a car. And the things that we do are, you know, difficult to predict, and it's very nuanced and subtle. Really, it's not surprising that they're hard to do. The precision at which, you know, we would need to run tracking and predict human behavior, we are still not there. It's going to take many, many decades until, you know, we can truly cross the uncanny valley. We're definitely coming close, but as soon as we, you know, come close to rendering, we care about animation. But when we get the animation solved, we probably want them to run autonomously, and then that's going to create, you know, the rabbit hole of, you know, layers and layers of depth that we will want to explore.
The thing is, there are sort of, as I said at the outset, a range of digital humans, and actually, you know, there's not just the totally photoreal digital human that you can't pick from reality, though that is obviously an incredibly important one. But there's, you know, like a ton of things where we want to, like in a game where I really want the amazingly rich Amy storytelling, I guess, that you can get from having a bunch of digital characters, even if I'm not quite, you know, fooled into thinking they're actual video live action. Nevertheless, you're opening up a lot of storytelling opportunities.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And look, I mean, we've always talked about the uncanny valley, right? And it's like, there's all kinds of valleys, uncanny valleys. There's an uncanny valley of like story, you know, does the story suck? There's an uncanny valley of writing and performance and AI. Like, those are actually much more daunting in some ways than the actual rendering part, you know? Like, if you mess up, you know, your story, if the actor's not good and not believable, you know, if your companion AI in your game isn't behaving properly, all these things just sort of shatter the illusion. On the other hand, if you get those things pretty right, your audience will forgive a lot of the other things. I mean, granted, you know, we need to have the eyes tracking and not have something be completely eerie, right? But so I worked on some early games, like on, you know, PlayStation 3, for instance, when, you know, some of this was still nascent. You know, and you look back at that stuff now, and this is like the Uncharted games. You know, it's very flawed, you know, but it still works because I think the underlying performance and the character moments and the actor choices are still there, and they're still evident, and then you can forgive some of the surface things, right? But what's exciting now, of course, is that, you know, we can make much more subtle choices as writers, as performers, where we can convey things without dialogue. And some of the early games I worked on, it was all dialogue. It was just like, you know, it was like trying to do a radio play because we had very little to work with in terms of expressing character otherwise, or watching, you know, a theater performance. But now we can leave things unsaid and say it with, you know, just a twitch in the character's face, and that's an exciting place to be.
You said when it works really well. And Isaac, nobody has had a character work better, I guess, in one sense, than little Michaela. I don't know if she likes being called little Michaela anymore, Michaela, but but just 3 million followers, I think I was looking at last night, just a phenomenal connection with an audience. That's a really interesting thing, isn't it? Because it's just not that you're trying to make a live action person look in a digital form. She is her own, well, I mean, how do you see her?
Well, I think what's interesting in terms of technology and games and film is that really it's all about connecting with an audience and with the fandom, right? And I think that changes over time. It changes with technology and it changes with generational influences of the audience. So I think what's really interesting is like meeting the audience where they are. So I think the first intriguing thing about Michaela was living on the internet and kind of telling narrative stories through the internet and where fans were and where they could connect in a very interesting way. There were all kinds of questions and interesting things we can go into about, visual decisions and how you kind of go about that. Because as Vlad alluded to earlier, like the more realistic a character is, there's more elements you have to add to it. In the earlier Uncharted series, because there's a certain limit to visual quality, that means the fans kind of accept that reality and you kind of live in this universe. When you add visual fidelity, you can't have the same level. You have to increase the animation fidelity because the fan no longer accepts the reality we used to be in. So it gets infinitely more complex. So I think those are the kind of questions you go into, which are super fascinating. I would love to hear Amy and Vlad and Jerome talk more about it because it's really interesting.
Vlad, what are those aspects that you think are like at the moment the things that we need to pay attention to in terms of the digital humans, and how much is the MetaHuman creation tool sort of addressing those?
What MetaHuman Creator tends to do is sort of democratize the first step of creating the character itself. Until now, this has been reserved for large budgets. People would need to spend a lot of time and a lot of money to create characters of this fidelity. Now, we're sort of MetaHuman Creator is almost like a game with the purpose of creating a character, which is sort of, I imagine a sort of Star Trek holodeck feeling, like, describing a character in the holodeck and then visualizing it and then sort of letting the story unfold. So really, we've just made the first step.
So, Jerome, you did amazing characters in one of my favorite pieces from your career, Lucky 13, which was, all digital, but with some really great characters in it. I just loved that piece. It must have been when you did that, which was like, I'm going to say now 2 years ago, maybe 3, it must have been really hard, as Vlad was saying, creating just even a mid character, let alone the lead character.
The challenge of that was really to have, you're creating a story where a person develops a relationship with a machine, basically, and you have to believe that relationship. So the onus of it really falls on the main character, on the person. And going back to what Natalie was saying, it's like the actress, Samira Wiley, she gave so much heart and reaction, in the performances that carried most of the piece. And designing that character digitally used the traditional methods. Well, so traditional, when I say traditional, meaning it's like acquisition, it's hundreds of scans of the person, it's creating lots of motion analysis, like, thousands and thousands of hours of material to analyze and to create one main character. And what's interesting is on this last piece I did for Love, Death, and Robots, I had 6 characters to do, 6 human characters that had the fidelity that we're expecting to carry, the whole show. And I knew I didn't have the resources to basically make 6. So that's when I got introduced to the technology with the MetaHuman characters. Basically, I was shown this demo of like, it's like make a character out of all the features of existing people to make a new person out of that, but then have controls to make sure that it doesn't break, what you expect a human face to look like. And I did this virtual session with, Vlad's artist, basically, over the internet. We shared a screen. I think it was in in Zoom. And I was able to design a character that looked kind of like the actors that we had. And it was, I thought it would take weeks to do. And Val was like, no, you can do it in like an hour and a half. And I was like, what? Okay, so we made 3 characters. And, they basically, when you make the character, then usually in traditional workflow, then you have the onus of making the rig for it, the facial rig, so you can animate it. In this case, it's like I realized, oh, the rig's already done. The beauty of this system is the rigs carry along of any face you make in the MetaHuman character, and that was amazing. We were able to take it and start working with it, in an amount of time that would have been prohibitive otherwise. I wouldn't have been able to do it if I hadn't been able to leverage that technology. And I was grateful to have early access to it. And I had to talk to Vlad a lot. He was very worried that it was going to crash in the middle of it. I said, "Don't worry, I'm patient. It's okay. We can make sure it works." And we pulled it off. So I was really happy with that. But going back to what you were saying, Mike. It's a terrifying prospect every time you tried to make a character. You never really know whether it's going to work or not.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, well, let's just talk about that rigging for a second. Is it significant to you that it's the same underlying rig? Because that's one of the things that MetaHuman, as you say, provides, like the character rigging, which we don't tend to think about. People tend to go for the visuals for a second. But like the thing that made me fall in love with 3Electron in the first place was how good the rigs were, right? So how significant is it that you've got the same underlying kind of thing across these multiple characters? Does that help your production?
Absolutely, because usually you have to do a bespoke rig for every individual face you create. And this has the system here, the black magic that he's incorporated into it is the fact that the rig is, I'm not worrying about the rig, just worrying about a face, and it's just gonna move correctly when you apply the capture data to it, and that's the astounding piece of it.
And it's critical too when we're not doing just digital doubles, right? I mean, because that's not always the case. Sometimes the appearance of the character is completely invented, doesn't match the actor, or we need to have one person doing a part of the performance, another person doing another part, and we need to sort of retarget. And so having that be universal is just like absolutely critical.
Yeah, and Vlad, that underlying rig being common is key. But the other thing, of course, is the user interface at the other end of it is, I'm not going to say it's simple, but it's just incredibly visually literate. It's graphical. It's not sort of typing in code and doing stuff. And yet it allows me to, as an artist, go for quite a large range of genders and ethnicities and ages. Did that itself make it a really difficult problem to be able to span, so we didn't just end up with a lot of middle-aged white guys like me, but a much more inclusive set of digital humans?
Yeah, I mean, we approach this problem with a sort of a data-based strategy where we are scanning real people and analyzing and measuring their offsets against some universal models. And yes, we have made a great deal of care to make the database sort of evenly distributed so that we can similarly well describe any human appearance.
Yeah, Isaac, I mean, your whole company and I guess the persona of Michaela she has this persona of like a social justice advocate. The idea of inclusion and being able to make these humans, responsible in the sense that they can reflect the world around us is pretty important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. And I think, what Vlad just touched on is standardization, I think, is one of the pieces that the layman doesn't really see right away when they see this MetaHuman creator. But I think that's one of the biggest aspects of it. Enabling creators and enabling the community to do things that weren't able to be done previously, to embrace that technology to create things. And then potentially in the future, Unreal and Epic Games and their admirable mission to kind of create this metaverse. I think the standardization of digital humans is a huge aspect of that, because it's not just that you can create this high quality now, it's that there's a standard out there for how you create a digital human in this world and in this universe, that potentially people can start digitizing themselves in a way that actually plays on different platforms and not just spending a bunch of time and money sinking into one thing that is for one platform. That's not realistic for most people. I think this was a big dent in that blocker that a lot of people have around digital humans because of that standardization and the expectation of what's possible now. And that was kind of a really big step that I think a lot of people missed when they saw that great reveal the other day of the MetaHuman.
We've been talking a bit about the faces, and I think that's great. But of course, the other stuff that MetaHuman has, things like hair and stuff. And Vlad, I don't know if you want to discuss this, but we touched on it briefly earlier, but you need to do more than just a face to make a digital human.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, hair is one of my favorite features of the MetaHuman because it's so real, and there is so much attention to detail that has been invested into making that groom library. That I think, one thing I found about MetaHumans is that people started to perceive them partially as humans. So things like, their, style, representation, culture, all of these aspects which are, related to humans, started to be important on these digital characters. So at that point, I was afraid and encouraged at the same time. Afraid because addressing all of these concerns is going to be infinitely complex, but that's fine. But the encouragement came from the relatability of these characters. That means that people started to care about these characters as as something that could even be real. So things like hair and all of the elements of individual expression, clothing, every little detail really is going to be become increasingly important as we progress further with this technology.
Isaac, Michaela has a very distinctive haircut that's almost her trademark, but Bermuda or somebody, is she going to start, you interested in exploring digital hair and what you can do with it?
That's a very good point. I think, early on with Michaela, we kind of decided that rather than dive into a world of, infinitely complex hairstyles, kind of like similar to the Mickey Mouse ears, have a signature that people recognize that probably serves us on both fronts, both on being able to stick with one for a while and also on being recognizable and kind of being iconic. And the other thing you touched on was wardrobe. I think that goes back to what Amy was talking about with story and kind of you being in the round around these characters. I think Michaela, a huge part of what has made her, successful and fans identify with her is her wardrobe and her style and her personality that is really kind of telling a narrative in a different way than we've, seen in the past of digital characters. They've always existed for a specific purpose in a movie, in a game to serve this thing. And Michaela's kind of existing for her own sake, and will people identify with her and will they care? And I think a huge part of that is her style, her wardrobe, her makeup, where she lives, where she goes, and what she does, which I think was a really big deal when we started this. There wasn't a clear answer to would people care, so it kind of went to that feeling that if we didn't really lean into that style and who she was, I don't think this would have been successful at all.
Amy, can I ask you about character for a second in these worlds? So we obviously have important dialogue that is very important in all range of media and stuff that we're doing, but as a writer, you want to kind of get enough fidelity in there and subtlety that you can get subtext. And I think always the holy grail is when I know that what they're saying isn't what the scene or the point of the thing is about, that it's something completely different.
Good writing, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I'm wondering if you could talk to that, because you do need quite a lot at the tech level to be able to support that level of subtlety at the writing level, right?
Yeah, for sure. And like I said, early on, we just kind of wrote our way around all of these limitations because I couldn't show sort of a subtle reaction on the character's face because it was a texture map, that was and a few polygons. Now we know that, we can write a complex scene that you would write for TV or film because we have that level of fidelity in the performance. I mean, the funny thing is about, games is our limitations are always more sort of unexpected for people who work in the live action space. Having a character take their jacket off, it's like, oh God, please, no, it's like, there's nothing underneath, you are your jacket, But now we're moving into a place where things like that are possible. And, leaving aside the individual character creation and how liberating that is, there's also all kinds of liberating aspects on the production side, right? Which is, if we're trying to create an experience that, feels like you're getting to play your favorite movie or you're in the driver's seat of your favorite TV show, think about the things that these experiences include. And they often include crowds of people, right? And it used to be look, it still is in some ways a nightmare to try to create that kind of variety and density. And we always had to kind of look away in games where it's like, oh, they made a crowd, but I see the same 5 guys over and over. Oh, he's got his shirt's green now, but talk about uncanny, right? And so all of these tools allow us as creators to not think about some of these production nightmares and just do the thing that is, creatively feels required, And again, like you say, going back to what you're saying, as writers, we're not trying to write around the limitations of the medium anymore. We're trying to use all these subtleties and encourage the actors to as well, and not feel like they're inhibited by kind of the strange way we capture some of this data.
Vlad, what challenges does that place for you? Because obviously we were talking earlier about, you want to get this really great face, it looks super real, and then we were talking about the rigging for production, but you're needing to produce a character that, Jerome can use on set in real time, but also in his final piece is going to look magnificent. And in the same way that we wanted an underlying stable rig across the characters, I want an underlying stable technology that means I'm not swapping in and out geo and having to screw around, right?
Yeah. I mean, you say challenge, but it's really that's the core thing we're passionate about. Sort of removing that turnaround time, which used to be in months, from digitizing a person and to having it in the engine. Like we are on a mission to have that like almost immediate. Sort of you look at some sort of device, it takes a few seconds to scan, and then the next minute there's a character for you ready, in the interactive world to be utilized in any way you need it. So the challenge really is first to remove any artistic interpretation in the process. People sometimes ask, are we on a mission to remove the artist from the pipeline? And absolutely not. What we want to do is remove the work needed to match reality one-to-one, and then enable the artist to intervene with that reality once it's captured and translated into the virtual world. So the challenge really is converting everything into a process and then making it automatic.
Yeah, I'd love to
Isaac,
jump in there because there's a couple of things that Vlad just pointed out. One is I hear this a lot about trying to take over artists' roles. And I think that anybody that's tried to create some great work would understand how easy it is to make terrible work and how nonsensical it is to worry about artists not having a place in this world. The tools to make it easier just enhances that ability. So I think that's a really great point that Vlad made. And I think also what Jerome was talking about, what I would love to hear Amy's thoughts on, is really the role of embracing technology, because I think we've all seen enough people fail by getting enthralled with a certain technology and just diving too far down that rabbit hole, or kind of being afraid of the technology. And I think what I found is that embracing the technology and leveraging where it's special and working around where it has holes has always been the way you succeed. And it sounds like that's like kind of what Jerome was just talking about. And I imagine Amy the same, but it's something that I think is very interesting. I'd love to hear your takes on that and how you try to embrace technology without fighting it, I guess.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's kind of the most fun part of the job. It is for me anyway, right? Which is why I'm always trying to kind of chase this unreachable goal. I think we all do this, right? Which is, it's not just the clinical, technical goal, right? Then there's no heart there, right? It's because the technology is the means to an end, and the end is, deep, believable, immersive story, right? And where you're not getting yanked out by things that, or frictions or things that you bump on. And so the fun part, and then finding collaborators and performers who want to embrace this too, is, the technology creates this black box playground where we're actually liberated from a lot of the things that live action production bogs down. I mean, all my actors that I work with, they work in live action. They might sit in a trailer for a week to do one shot, and so where we're just out there working because there's no camera, there's no lights, it doesn't matter, try this, try that. And it becomes this much more organic, improvisational space, which I think is tangible in the final product, that you could see that it was immediate and fun, right? Getting back to are we trying to eliminate artists? It's like, no, we're trying to actually liberate them from all the drudgery work and let them just do their art, right? We absolutely need people touching this stuff. And so that's the other aspect here, is what I love about it is the malleability. It takes so much of I'd be terrified to shoot live action probably at this point, right? Because this stuff is so malleable, and that actually is like immensely liberating, which gets back to the comments around these underlying rigs, that we're not just capturing data that is baked the same way live action is baked. That's the beauty of it. We also need to retain that, right?
Isaac, how much improv is there in your pipeline, and how much are you using real time at the point of working on producing the material?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have quite a number of pipelines in what we try to do, from immediate to pretty high quality, and a lot of work gone into it. Performance can be stored and captured and used for other things. So you can now start to talk about different performances and categorizing them and piecing together different things that start to feel very real. I think that's also a very interesting part of the standardization that Vlad and Epic and Cubic Motion have created, because every performance we create, we want to be able to store and use in, content can be reused and recaptured and reconnected in different ways, which is very interesting to us.
Isaac, I was going to ask you, one of the things that has been the case with Michaela is she's been an advocate for people from everything from mental health to like a whole lot of causes. And sort of central to her persona is this empathy, this ability to be empathetic to her audience. And I'm wondering, like, are there lessons that you've learned about how to accurately sort of walk down that path of achieving a sort of an authenticity? I know that sounds weird when we're talking about a digital character, but an authenticity or an empathy, because that's been, sort of a trademark success for you guys.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the answer is it's really hard. I think being authentic is challenging in every medium, and trying to make a virtual character, a digital human that feels authentic it was a huge challenge. And I think the goal was always for people, especially potentially marginalized people or people that feel different, to be able to see themselves in this character. I think that from the way she was created, her backstory, everything about her is meant to be inviting to you to come and feel like you also could be represented by this. So I think it's very natural to who Michaela is to be empathic and to represent communities and people that feel marginalized and on the outskirts of society.
What I really like about Michaela is, like, following the story. You don't get a feeling of the story only, but of somebody's life. And that was sort of really unique emotion that I had about that project. It's really amazing.
Yeah, it is stunning. And also it's stunning how people perceive the character. I'm always of the opinion of giving the audience quite a lot of credit. I don't think, like, people in the popular press will often say, they didn't realize that a digital influencer was a digital character. And I think that's not the case. I think especially younger people are incredibly digitally literate. And Amy, I might get you to comment on this, but I feel like they're so literate, and yet they're okay that they understand that it's a digital character, and they don't have a problem with having empathy with a digital character, as opposed to some imagining that we're tricking them into thinking that it's real necessarily.
No, absolutely. I mean, and for us trying to tell stories, that's critical. That, of course they know it's a digital character. We're not trying to make them, squint and think it's live action. There's always going to be this sort of a level of stylization and veneer, right? But to be able to feel like you can really relate to and embody the protagonist that you are controlling in this experience, and to be able to feel like you can actually empathize and start, feeling attachment or feeling any emotion about, the other characters, the companion characters. I'm worried about things like the uncanny valley of companion AI, and the fact that you really feel like you are occupying this space and this experience and this story with characters that you care about, including your own, that you're embodying. And that stuff's really hard, and you can see it in games, how badly we've done with this in the past. You'll have these characters that emote beautifully in a cinematic, and then you get back to gameplay, and then they flip around and run at some strange point and stare at the wall like, crazed automatons. And it's like, talk about breaking the immersion, right? And so being able to have, machine learning and AI that can help us simulate and emulate real human behavior is going to be critical, whether it is, there's a real-time just experience, or whether it's a story that we're trying to take the player through, for them to really get on board and immerse themselves. They can't be bumping on all this stuff, right?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because, and I'm so glad you've raised this point, because as we're moving forward, there are interesting challenges as we no longer just maybe looking at something where you've got a path, a narrative path, a linear path perhaps for characters, but you're saying, I've got a world, I'm going to create it. Other people are going to come in and inhabit it, and be it a metaverse or whatever, but that those characters have to interact in real time, and it's not going to be off a script. And this is where I think there's a bit of a confusion, or perhaps a mischaracterization of what AI is, because a lot of the stuff that we've had impact over is machine learning, which is learning from studying real people or learning from sort of data sets that have real people. And it's not programmatically somebody inventing a super intelligent being that does stuff. It's a sort of statistical thing, but that means that you are getting a genesis of an authenticity from what it learnt from real people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's biomechanics, it's psychology, right? I mean, just down to simple behaviors. I mean, there's a reason in games you kind of used to just be sort of a lone wolf, because making companion characters like behave correctly and not misbehave and be believable is really damn hard. But if we really want to tell good stories, and in the same way that other mediums do, they're rarely lone wolf stories. So we need to conquer this. Just looking at all the things we do as humans when we relate to each other, and what that body language means, and how we can create systems that can actually be emulating that in real time without us having to do this sort of bespoke authorship, because that's at a production level, that's way too much, right? I know I'm kind of going rabbit holing on this, but it's because it is the most critical thing to be having these experiences feel believable and authentic and meaningful, and not suddenly having that illusion shattered every time you go into a real-time simulation of gameplay and out of a cutscene.
I love what you're saying, Amy. I have to think of reading a book and how you're creating a space for somebody to, build that world. And there's very few things that are going to break up that reality, because there is no visual. And I think as we introduce more visuals, the more opportunities we actually have to break that reality for the person. So it's almost like the more we're doing with technology is trying to get out of that person's way and allow them not to be distracted by the things that break that reality. And I think that's
a great way of putting it, yeah.
There's sort of concepts of like a cognitive cliff, which is that if you produce this incredibly elaborate digital human that looks very, very real, then you better back that up with some good cognitive responses, or it's
not a valley,
it's
a cliff. Yes,
yeah.
Right.
Vlad, it just seems like this characterization that you've got this ultra intelligent piece of code, like some Ultron thing, isn't how it works. That you guys start with real people, and it's learning from people. You focus on real people as your sort of starting point.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's always based on real people. That's where the data comes from. But I don't think that that we will not see sort of autonomous agents being so believable anytime soon. Again, human behavior is very complex. The underlying emotions and personality. There are some layers that will start to peel, and that will be exciting in its simplistic form.
Jerome, did you want to add anything on that?
The system only works because you're putting the data from real people through the machine learning loops, and that's why you're getting that kind of library that's convincing. And I want to see advances. We were talking about cloth earlier. The rest of the character needs to have clothes on, and cloth simulation, though not as not as interesting a topic as doing human reproduction of human movement. We still need fast ways to do cloth simulation, and we want to see machine learning being applied to that, or to the way muscles work on the rest of the human body. So there's a lot more opportunity there to get faster interfaces for creating a full human asset.
Actually, Isaac, I have to ask you this personal question. Why do you think she has become so iconic?
I think it's like most things in the world we work with, where everything has to come together. As we all know, if the visuals don't work, if the narrative doesn't work, if there's so many aspects that come together to create something. If any one of them fail, you've failed. So I think it's everything. I think visually, the imperfections of Michaela are somewhat unique to digital characters, where maybe her teeth have a little gap in the front, and maybe she has a funny hairdo and she has freckles, like this kind of thing that makes her a little more relatable. And I also think there's something interesting about not really trying to cross the uncanny valley, but rather kind of living in this space that typically you try to avoid, where like she's eye catching because you can tell there's something different, and that kind of draws people into it. Like, what is going on here? And then they kind of get sucked into this narrative and figuring out, like, looking through an Instagram page or trying to understand what she is. So I think that was part of it as well. And then you kind of get to be part of this story that's unraveling and be in on the secret kind of thing. Like, you're in on this thing now, which kind of is a draw to some fans.
Jerome, one of the things I was going to ask you is how imperfect your characters are. Like, one of the things I loved about MetaHuman is you can go off symmetrical mode. So I suffer from this thing that one of my eyes is different to the other, and I've had to learn that through testing and things that I've done with projects. But that imperfection that we heard alluded to by Isaac is actually part of our humanity.
I embrace all the asymmetry as much as possible in our, so basically you want to, in some cases, accent it, which is interesting because if you pick certain actors, if they're photogenic, it usually means it's because they're very symmetrical. So you want to find the asymmetry and basically, plus it. So asymmetry is great because that's nature. Nobody's perfect. It's like except for, the super actresses and models who basically are actually perfectly symmetrical. But for our work, we want our digital humans to be as imperfect as possible.
So moving forward, we've got this idea that we're going to be able to create these characters with more freedom, I guess, and certainly from a production point of view without maybe some of the time and cost constraints. Amy, I'm going to ask you, does the stuff that's been changing in the last couple of years change the sort of things that you're interested in exploring creatively? Or is it just like I try and work with a clean piece of paper and then let somebody else solve it technically later?
No, I mean, look, we have to design to our, limitations even now, right? And that's honestly part of the fun. I mean, like I said, I started off, literally making pixel art for the Atari, and there's times I miss some of that problem-solving space because we can do anything. It's like it's sometimes more fun to feel like you're fighting the constraints. But, no, I think what it does is that it allows us to think way more cinematically about the actual interactive experience than just the cinematics that are sort of, pre-rendered. And the fact that we do everything in real time now, opens up a lot of interesting things around continuity, that there can be, changes to people's experiences that are reflected in these sort of real-time story moments.
Hey, Isaac, have you got a problem in someone like Michaela, who is now iconically sort of burnt into the popular psyche, that if Vlad or a team comes up with amazing new tools, to a certain extent you don't want her to change, and yet she has changed a bit already. How fluid is her visual identity as it pertains to the technology? Can you suddenly sort of up the ante and not risk alienating her audience?
That was a big question we had early on, and we found out our audience doesn't care. We've done it many times, and early on we were like, oh, how are we going to do this? We roll out updates slowly, because, other iterations are like, you'll have Toy Story 1, and by Toy Story 4, they still feel like the same characters until you go and watch them side by side, and you're like, holy cow, this is like dramatically different, but you have that break in between. So we've just we upgrade as we go, and our fans accept it. It's part of this world that we live in, that she's, like, things change and adjust and improve, and it's somewhat gradual. But yeah, we kind of just took the approach of let's try it out and see. Let's see if we get angry fans yelling at us or not, and we really haven't. They've been very accepting and really great about it.
So you've done a whole lot of music videos, you've done, which are kind of obviously more of a sort of a structured piece. You've done a lot, obviously, of this work, which is her direct to camera in whatever format that is. But clearly, as we move forward, there's going to be a lot more in terms of motion, Instagramming and great still photos notwithstanding. That's got to be a huge thing on your agenda, just the fidelity of those moments, I guess, rather than those images.
It is, and I feel similarly to what Amy just said. Like, sometimes when you have this structure, you're limited. Like, let's do first-person camera because we can do that. It's, we're not blocked by technology. As that opens up, it almost becomes a blank canvas, that there's so many possibilities that it's almost harder to structure and think through because, the possibilities are endless. But that's a great problem to have. It's just one that it's a constant struggle to wrap your brain around that and how to connect with fans and how to tell engaging stories and create a space where they can come in and fill it in with their imagination. And I think that's what we're trying to do. And I think this technology will definitely help us do that.
Vlad, I guess the question everybody wants to ask is, where are we in your planning horizon? This isn't the end point, I hope. Hopefully you're going to say that there's a lot more room to go.
Absolutely not. This is just the first step, really. As I mentioned previously, we've just, with this project, we're opening up new capability and democratize certain parts of this technology, but we've also sort of started a huge effort of collecting all possible appearances that people can take, and of course there's many other things coming in the next years that we have planned out that we can't speak of at the moment, but you can be sure that this is just sort of a first step in a sort of longer mission, sort of towards the infinite problem that we're gonna take.
Well, I just want to say thank you to this panel. I could have talked to you guys 4 hours. I mean, literally, I find this the most interesting subject because, let's face it, people are the most interesting things, and we live as creatures that just, naturally respond to other people, to their faces, to the nuances that go on. And so it's been great being able to have this discussion. And I've got to say, the runway ahead of us that is being provided by the work that Vlad and his team has done is just amazing. So a lot more to come, and we're looking forward to doing it. But thank you for spending time with us today.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. That was
Thanks,
really fun.
Mike. Thanks all.